Famous pianists and their technique, Chapter 7, Czerny, Technique Personified. Summary by Laura Aguirre. We begin this chapter with some history of Carl Czerny as a childhood pianist. He was born in Vienna in 1791. He died in 1857. But in 1842, he wrote a memoir, his Recollections from My Life. And here he documents some of his experiences. He was an only child, and by the time he was 10 years old, he was incredibly talented, and he could play everything from Mozart and Clementi, though his father wasn't necessarily looking to make him a virtuoso, I guess to tour him around and things of that nature. But he was super talented, and there was a family friend named Wenzel Krumpholz, who was a Beethoven fan, a devotee is what they call him, and he wanted to take Czerny to meet Beethoven. So at age 10, Beethoven got to hear Czerny play. It was Mozart's Concerto in C major, as well as Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata and the vocal piece Adelaide. And Beethoven was very much impressed that he immediately requested that Czerny become one of his pupils. Czerny as a pupil and a teacher. So we know he obviously was extremely talented, a very talented young student. And in 1804, there was a bit of a little spat between Beethoven and Czerny, where Czerny was playing a quintet, and I guess he decided to improvise on it a little bit, adding, playing notes an octave higher, adding some extra notes, and Beethoven was not pleased at all. I'm assuming he probably chewed him out in front of the whole quintet, and later he told Czerny that he would prefer to hear the music exactly as the composer wrote it, and that Czerny needs to honor that. By age 15, Czerny became a teacher himself. He had a really good reputation, and he ended up teaching about 11 to 12 pupils per day. In 1810, Czerny got to meet Clementi, and he observed Clementi's teaching style, and he writes in his memoir that I primarily owe it to this circumstance that later I was fortunate enough to train many important students to a degree of perfection for which they became world famous. It's only fair, of course, to give Beethoven credit here as well, for his teaching method also influenced Czerny, and here he says Beethoven showed him many technical fundamentals which were yet unknown to pianists. Here we have the relationship between Czerny and Franz Liszt. We know Liszt as our Hungarian composer, virtuoso pianist, and teacher. And he met Czerny around the age of 10. This was in 1819. Liszt's father took him to visit Czerny to play for him. At the time, Liszt's father was the only one that was his teacher. So Czerny listened to him play, was very impressed, and they asked if he could become one of his pupils. So a year later, the family moved to Vienna, and Liszt began taking formal lessons from Czerny. He was a very eager student, very hardworking, and he advanced very quickly. Liszt had him learn music in large amounts very quickly as well, which made him become a phenomenal sight reader and a master improviser. Even during his public performances, not only did Liszt play a bunch of music for the audience, he also would improvise on the little motifs and stuff that people would give him right there on the spot. So hence it was part of the show. So Liszt's dad realized, wow, my son's getting really good. Let's take him on more tours. And Czerny was not too happy about this, as he wanted Liszt to stick around a couple more years for more formal instruction on composition. So Czerny feels he lost out on that. He missed out on some beneficial instruction. Later, I think Liszt was about 26 years old. Czerny heard him perform in Paris, and he thought the performance sounded kind of confused or on the wild side. But audiences were already really enjoying Liszt and his public performances, so it didn't really matter what Czerny thought at this point. And Liszt must have been doing something right, because even today he's still quite popular in the piano world for using his pieces to show virtuosity. So during this time, Czerny was known as a popular teacher and a composer, though he did have a couple of critics. Apparently Schumann thought his music was boring. After Schumann listened to Introduction and Brilliant Variations on an Italian Theme, this is Opus 302, composed by Czerny, he said that if he had enemies and he wanted to destroy them, he would make them listen to this music. Ouch, Schumann. And then Chopin, basically, all he said was that Czerny was a good man, but nothing more. Didn't have much else to say about him. Going back to Czerny as a teacher, though, he did write a huge book here published in 1839, and the title is The Complete Theoretical and Practical Pianoforte School, from the first rudiments of playing to the highest and most refined state of cultivation, with the requisite numerous examples, newly and expressly composed for the occasion, opus 500. And it was written in several volumes. Volume 1 includes 19 lessons, scales in all keys, 219 pages of fundamentals and beginning technical material. Volume 2 includes 16 chapters on fingering technique. Volume 3 includes 20 chapters on interpretation, and Volume 4 includes interpretation and playing styles of popular performers during this time. Beethoven is included in this chapter. Czerny's piano method follows the same path as Hummel's piano method, but pays more attention to detail and is more practical for the student to use. So Volume 1 includes the recommendation of a 1-hour daily lesson, and that the student also practice 1 hour individually. The teacher should also give detailed instruction on whatever piece the student is learning or exercises. That way they can practice on their own and remember exactly what the teacher instructed them to do. And of course, the student should practice consistently and diligently. Lesson 1 consists of body and hand position, and there's a long list here that they include from the beginning of this chapter that details how to sit at the piano. So I'm going to go through it here a little bit watered down. The seat position should be right in the middle of the keyboard. The height of the stool should be proportional to the stature of the student. The stool must never be moved forward or backward. Head position and chest position should be upright and natural. There should be no head nodding or bobbing while you're playing the piano or performing. Your feet should be flat on the floor, and if it's a small child, they should have a little stool for their feet to rest on. Arms should not be pressed against the body or extended outward. They need to be hanging naturally by their natural weight. The forearm should be straight and horizontal, and wrist should also be straight with no bending of the wrist upward or downward. Fingers should be somewhat bent but never pressed against one another, and of course no long fingernails, as you will be playing the piano with the tips of your fingers. Czerny also stresses that the piano use a quiet, controlled approach to the instrument, but they should still have freedom of movement. In other words, no tension, but of course you shouldn't be kind of flailing your arms about, according to Czerny's instructions. I wanted to share some examples in Volume 1 of how detailed this book is in comparison to probably Hummel's book. And here Czerny is talking about something called mezzo staccato touch. And he writes here, when a student is, or a pianist is playing a rapid passage, that they need to use this kind of touch on the piano. And it consists in this, that each finger with its soft and fleshy tip on the keys makes movements like that used in scratching or in tearing off something, employs more or less of the rapid action of the nerves and muscles, and thereby obtains a very clear, pearly, and equal touch, by which even in the quickest times all passages may be executed with equal roundness and finish, with a full and not too harsh tone, and with one most perfect and pleasing tranquility of the hands. So that's how he wrote it, as you can tell, very descriptive. He also talks about crescendo, and this is where we're introduced to the idea of arm weight. And he says here, before anything else, it must be observed that the crescendo should never be produced by a visible exertion of the hands or by lifting the fingers higher than usual when we are playing legato, but only by the increased internal action of the nerves and by the greater degree of weight which the hand receives therefrom, without, however, fretting the flexibility of the fingers. So once again, very detailed. He concludes his first volume here by talking about the relationship between student and teacher, that every pupil makes much greater progress when he plays his lessons willingly and with satisfaction. Nothing is more important for the teacher than to form and develop as soon as possible the taste of his pupil, meaning that you should know your likes and dislikes of your student and not just give them, oh, all these difficult pieces, all these boring, dull pieces, because then the student will lose interest and not want to play piano anymore. And as he puts here, they end up getting a distaste for the art as a whole, and that is exactly what we do not want as a teacher. Briefly, here's a glimpse of Volume 2. It's all about fingering, and he gives 3 fundamental rules concerning this. Number 1, that the 4 long fingers of each hand must never be passed over one another. Number 2, the same finger must not be placed on 2 or more consecutive keys. And number 3, the thumb and the little finger should never be placed on the black keys in playing the scales. And it's interesting, as a little kid, I always wondered, where did these rules come from? Well, there you go. Here, Czerny wrote them himself. Volume 3 of Opus 500 mainly focuses on expression. In this portion, there are chapters that deal with dynamics, rhythm, tempo, touch, melody playing, style, memory, public performance, pedaling, sight reading, extemporaneous playing, and tuning. Czerny points out a couple of pianists here and their influence on how to play expressively. Here we have Clementi's style. He said that he had a firm touch and tone. His performance execution was very clear and fluent, and he had great finger flexibility. Kramer and Dusek are kind of lumped together here. They played very cantabile. They had no harsh effects with their performances. Their runs and passages were always played evenly, and they had fine legato and pedal technique. Czerny also included Mozart's playing style and Beethoven's playing style. Here he said that Mozart had a distinct and dazzling manner of playing. He focused more so on staccato touch than legato. He had an animated execution and his expression was never obbligato. Beethoven's style had an impassioned energy. He had smooth connected cantabile and he was more expressive when the music was humorous or fanciful. So very cool, interesting observations here by Czerny. So in conclusion, I'm sure Czerny was aware of the evolution and the changes going on around him, that there was a new style that was beginning to emerge, and Thalberg, Chopin, and Liszt were its leaders. The piano as well had gone through quite an evolution, especially from Clementi and Mozart's time, which was now allowing composers to create new styles, new composition, and new challenging effects on the instrument. That compared to Cristofori's piano from years ago, I'm sure the piano of this 1800s period was much sturdier and much more willing to take on these cool new special effects and these new compositions. So it was quite an exciting time, I could imagine.